It's time for another episode of Corner of the Galaxy from the Box, the show that gets you behind the scenes of the LA Galaxy and into the minds of soccer reporters and MLS experts. Your hosts for the day are Corner of the Galaxy's Josh Guesman and LA Times soccer reporter Kevin Baxter. Let's start the show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Corner of the Galaxy from the Box on cornerofthegalaxy.com. I'm your host, Josh Guesman, coming to you on Monday, November 9th, 2020. And for the LA Galaxy, the 2020 season has come to an end after a 3-0 loss to the Vancouver Whitecaps. Not surprising, being the LA Galaxy were already out of the playoffs headed into this game. The result may be a little surprising, maybe not, depending on your views of the 2020 season. So we're going to go over that loss. We're going to talk about some of the things that were said after the game by some of the players, some interesting things maybe we can dig into and connect some dots. There's a whole bunch of players out on international duty, and that also ties into the game against the Vancouver Whitecaps. And then we got Galaxy roster and roster decisions and final standings, Galaxy stats. So we're going to put a whole bunch of things together for you and get you through this last game and sort of point it towards the offseason a little bit. To help me do all that, it's Kevin the Panda Baxter. Kevin, how's it going, buddy?
Hey, you know what? In the spirit of the election season, I don't think the Galaxy should concede this season. I think they're still a playoff team. And I think with those 12 losses, what they need to go back and look at fraudulent goals for their opponents, and then goals that weren't counted for the Galaxy. I'm sure they're there.
I was going to say, I think the Galaxy should just claim the MLS Supporter Shield. That's what they should do.
Exactly.
They should go out and just claim, for electoral college purposes, they should claim it. Anyway, lots of stress relief after this. And can I tell you something? And I said this on Twitter today, and I don't think people quite understand where I'm coming from.
This is just between you and me, right?
Yeah, this is just between nobody else is listening. But between you and me, this season was absolutely exhausting to cover, and I only had to cover one team. You cover multiple teams, so I already feel like I'm whining to somebody who's not going to give me any sort of slack or leeway on it. I certainly will admit, Kevin, that some of it has to be the fact that my little dude Jake was born this year, so I'm sure that the lack of sleep and just the constant go that I'm on there certainly had its place in there. But talking to players after the game in Vancouver, and I think Sasha Kleshin talked about it, and Perry Kitchen talked about it. It's like playing games every 3 or 4 days. It was exhausting for them, and then covering games every 3 or 4 days was exhausting for me. But the hardest part about this season, because we went from start to stop for a very long time, and then all of a sudden it was go go go. The hardest part was trying to figure out different ways to frame an LA Galaxy loss, because this season was crap for them, and I think my vocabulary probably grew in a lot of ways. A lot of synonyms for losing, because that's what happened with the LA Galaxy.
Well, and that's why I have some sympathy for players. And Guillermo used the schedule as an excuse. Well, not an excuse. He used it. He cited it many times where this was an unusual year, and I get that, but teams like Toronto and Philadelphia and Sporting Kansas City managed to thrive under the same difficulties. But it was a tough season, and I really feel for general managers and coaches, because the season changed. You put your roster together based on the schedule, and some teams want to have a real strong 11 and maybe a weak bench because there's going to be enough time between games, and then all of a sudden you're playing 3 games in a week and you need squad rotation and your squad's not that deep. It was just really tough. You started the season, came out of training camp, started the season, then had a 4-month break. Then all of a sudden you're playing this tournament in a quarantine situation where you're playing some games at 9 in the morning and some games at 11 at night. I mean, I was there for that. That was off the hook crazy.
Right.
Then you come home and you're playing games without fans. You're traveling the same day of the game. By the way, that rule went out the window. I don't know when, but the Galaxy were in Portland the day before their game, and they had gotten permission to travel to Colorado the day before their game. I know when Houston came here to play LAFC, that whole one-day travel thing was gone. So I don't know whether a lot of teams complained about that or what. But, the travel rules changed. Again, no fans in the stands. That makes a big difference. Flying to a different time zone to play the game the same day. It was tough. I agree with Alexei Lalas. I mean, this season gets an asterisk, but the team that wins is still champion.
Yeah, it's a different sort of thing. I refuse to acknowledge a Supporter Shield winner that didn't play a whole bunch of other teams. That's fine. Philadelphia Union, you can have your shield that apparently LAFC didn't return on time, and all sorts of fun stuff that goes into that. But at the same time, asterisk, giant one, and you can say, hey, they just survived it better. scheduling in this year was crazy and nuts, and the Galaxy ended up playing 8 teams, while some teams ended up playing, I think, 13 or 14 different opponents whenever you look at it. So just nuts. I don't know. I don't know how to put any of this. I can tell you one thing, that whenever you look at this, Kevin, you look at what the LA Galaxy did this year, you look at what happened around the league, and one thing is fairly conclusive regardless or irregardless of COVID-19, irregardless of any scheduling situations that were difficult, that the LA Galaxy were a bad team. Were they as bad as their standings finally proved out? Yeah, I mean, probably, because that's where they ended up. I mean, that's one of those things where you sort of say, the truth is in the standings, where they ended up. But we talked about this beforehand. A shallow team, a team without any sort of depth, and then basically missing their designated players for every for 40% of the time. But it ended up really was more than that, and we'll get into some of those stats and sort of let you know what that was. But yeah, I mean, there was no cohesiveness, there was no momentum outside of the 4 games that they won, sort of coming back after the MLS's back tournament, which they stunk up and didn't play very well. So there's just a lot of things that went sideways, and this is a bad LA Galaxy team. Every stat that we pull tells you this is a bad LA Galaxy team. And this game in Portland against Vancouver, which is probably one of the first where you get to play Vancouver and Portland. I'm sure the LA Galaxy have never done that before. Was just sort of a microcosm of everything that happened. You had a Julian Araujo red card, which was certainly an issue this year of keeping Araujo on the field. You had an LA Galaxy team, Kevin, who I thought actually played pretty well through the first 15 or 20, 25, even 30 minutes. Still gave up a goal during that time, which of course makes sense for the 2020 team. Defensive lapses, turning things off, all that made sense. But overall, it's Dominic Kinnear's last game to sort of impress the LA Galaxy brass here, and say, hey, I can be the guy who's in charge because the guys listen to me, and then your guys go out and give you a performance like that. It wasn't a lazy performance. It just wasn't the one that Dominic Kinnear would like to put on the top of his CV before he hands it over to Dennis DeClosa and Chris Klein.
Yeah, but a lot of the players did come out and try to make up for that. They had a lot of kind things to say about Dominic afterwards. We don't know for sure whether Dominic even wants this job. He hasn't answered that question, and he has been asked many times. He said it was unfair to talk about it now and not to think about him right now. I do know that he feels wounded the way the last process went when he was interviewed, but obviously not given sincere interest in the job. And I think now he's proven himself, and a lot of the players coming out speaking on his behalf, hopefully that'll go a long way, because I do think that the players did respond to him.
Just remember, Kevin, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, God himself, spoke and said that Dominic Kinnear would be a great coach, and the LA Galaxy decided, not sexy enough, and then decided to go away from it. And in full transparency, I think I kind of agreed at that time that, the LA Galaxy need a bigger name, they need to do something, and blah, 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 blah. I can tell you that I feel like I'm full of crap. That looking at it now and looking at what the LA Galaxy need, and there's some guys who lay that out. We'll get to those quotes, but there's a lot of things here that sort of point towards Dominic Kinnear. Just wanted to get over some stuff from the Vancouver game before we start diving into all the little things. And certainly, if you read my game recap, I wasn't exactly focused on this game like it was super important. Now, the LA Galaxy, Kevin, came out before this game and said, Dominic Kinnear said it, and the whole organization was saying this is an important game for us. We're going to play it like it matters, because we want the momentum that carries through in the offseason of having won the last game. We want that feeling. We want that good feeling to last, throughout however long this offseason is going to be. So they wanted to do that. And then whenever they said that, they then said, hey, Sebastian Lletget, you can go to the U.S. men's national team early, so you don't have to be at this game. So we're going to take this super seriously, but go ahead, you can depart early, which is fine. Ultimately, I don't think it means all that much. But they also did the same thing with Jonathan Dos Santos, which is, hey, Jonathan Dos Santos, you know what? We know you've been injured and haven't been able to train or play, but please go to the Mexican national team. I imagine that way their doctors can sort of look at you and evaluate you and see how things are going. I wouldn't expect that all of a sudden Jonathan Dos Santos is 100% healthy and playing in friendlies, Kevin, but it's certainly an interesting storyline to watch if indeed that is the case.
Well, and if you need more evidence of how the Galaxy collapsed at the end of the season, just think about what you just said. They took the field for the last game without their captain, Dos Santos, one of their DPs, without arguably their second best player, third best player, one of the top players, Sebastian Lletget. And then they had no assistant coach. I mean, they're coaching. They have no coaching staff, so they're missing two of their star players. They have no coaching staff, and they go into this game and said, "Yeah, this is an important game. We're really going to try to win this." You sort of, it's one of those things where do you pay attention to what they say or what they do?
Yeah, it's just interesting how it goes. I mean, the lineup that you got there was still pretty much it was almost exactly what you'd expect. You had Zubak starting up top. Again, Chicharito coming off the bench in this game, played the entire second half. You had Pavone and Alvarez, so Efrain Alvarez slotted in for Sebastian Lletget. By the way, for somebody who constantly berates Efrain Alvarez, I'll tell you that I thought he had one of his better games in an LA Galaxy kit in this particular game. You had Yoni Gonzalez, who started and actually played very well up until the point where they had to sub him off because of the red card from Julian Araujo. You had Corona, who slotted in for Jonathan Dos Santos, and Kitchen was back in there, and then you had Insua, Steres, Gonzalez, Araujo, and then Bingham back in goal there. Okay, quick first trivia question here, Kevin, and I know you know the answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. There was one player this year who played every minute of every game, and I'm pretty sure everybody can figure that one out. That one is, of course, Christian Pavone. But there's another player who at least started and played in every game this year. Can you name that person?
Yeah, it's Insua, right?
Yeah, it is correct, and because I told you earlier today, but I wanted everybody else to play along at least for a little bit. So Emiliano Insua has been I would say, an average plus defender for the LA Galaxy this year. I think that he suffers from some lapses and some other things that aren't great. But it was funny because I was doing a podcast with some guys over in the UK, and they knew all about Insua. Obviously, he played for Liverpool, so they were very familiar with him. And they're like, "Wow, well, you have him, and you have Jonathan Dos Santos, and you have Chicharito." They're like, "So why does your team suck?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we've been covering them for years, and sometimes we don't have answers to those questions." But they knew Insua, so I think if you're looking at guys that were more success than failure on this, Emiliano Insua, and this season is probably one of those guys who's a bigger success than any sort of failure, and certainly coming in a position where Ashley Cole used to play, where Todd Donovan used to play, where the LA Galaxy have really wanted that left back, and having to play every game with Danilo Acosta suffering the season-ending injury. So a lot of things sort of went into the fact that Insua played every game. He just didn't play every minute of every game. I think he was 89 minutes short of the total, so he had some substitute appearances in there where he was pulled out for subs and stuff like that. So
yeah, I'm going to push back a little. I think he was above average. I'm not a superstar by any stretch of the imagination, but I think at that position, I think it's a good thing that you're surprised that he played that many minutes and played that many games and started and played that much. He had a really high work rate, I thought, but he was solid, and it kind of like an offensive lineman. If you really don't notice him, he's probably having a really good season.
Yeah, I said average plus. That was that means above average. So I think we're on the same page here. With as much as Guillermo Barros Schelotto wanted him and whoever was playing the right back role to get into the attack, a ton of miles put on the legs of Insua. He might as well have been playing midfield there. And then you talk about Christian Pavone. Yes, I think the criticism of Christian Pavone not coming back and playing defense is an accurate one. But also, when he's your most dangerous offensive weapon, you probably don't want him playing a ton of defense. Just some on occasion would be just great. So the big storylines in here is, of course, that the LA Galaxy allow the first goal, which isn't necessarily surprising, except for Kevin. They are actually controlling possession. They actually look like the better team. It looked like they were going to find something. The craziest thing that you'll ever see is that the expected goals in this, and it makes sense because it's absolutely 100% true, but the LA Galaxy were dangerous in the first half, all the way up until Julian Araujo got his red card in the 41st minute, and it was a well-deserved red card. He deserves to go. He wasn't trying to injure anybody. It wasn't this horror tackle that somebody tried to make it out to be on Twitter. That's not what happened. He just went through the ball with his studs up. He got the ball, and then he got the player afterwards. And there was some distance between those two things, but at the same time, it's stuff that you sort of have to watch for. And so whenever Julian Araujo goes, then they end up giving up a second goal about 2 minutes later, and so that sort of just spirals out. And whenever Chicharito and Christian Sasha Kleshin come in the second half, the Galaxy again pick it up and actually put together a pretty good sort of push in the second half. They were just down to 10 men, which is kind of like playing with Ethan Zubak up top. It's like you're down to 10 men most of the time. And so this is an LA Galaxy team that looked dangerous many times. Sasha Kleshin hit the crossbar. There were some shots that looked like they might go, and there's still, I think the Vancouver keeper ended up having to make, Evan Bush had to make 6 saves, I think, total whenever you look at it. And having said that, the LA Galaxy had almost no chances to score on any of those. The expected goals ended up being like 2.7 for Vancouver and like 0.3 or 0.4 for the LA Galaxy. So the score checks out. The 3-0 score, that checks out. Everything about that checked out. The LA Galaxy put in, I would say a workman-like effort, but they have zero to show for it. And for me, Kevin, that is 2020 in a nutshell.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of ended the season the way it started. Remember, they started with that 5-game winless streak, the worst start in franchise history, and then they kind of ended on a down note. It's kind of bookends when you think about it. I mean, there were some positives with Dom, especially the 2 previous games, and there seemed to be a little bit of hope. But I guess was that really that stoppage time goal from Rui Diaz in the Seattle game that took a lot of the air out of the balloon, and you could kind of see the hangover, when they got to Portland. That yeah, they wanted to play. They wanted to act like there was something to play for, but I think everybody was smart enough to know there really wasn't.
So we went into the post game there, and there weren't a lot of reporters in there, mostly because there were other LA games going on. And so whenever there's a home LA game and an away LA game on the other side, it's usually just me and a couple of my friends in the in the post game. So we got to talk and ask some questions. Dominic Kinnear talked. It was funny. Just. He could tell. He was like, we didn't want to end it this way, and you never like to see this. I asked him about Julian Araujo. I thought it was funny, and I'll paraphrase sort of his response. And I said, Julian Araujo has had some problems, staying on the field. He's an aggressive defender. He's young. He makes mistakes. What does he need to do to sort of figure that out? And it was funny. Dominic Kinnear says, he's a tough guy. He's like, no, but like not a pretend tough guy. Julian Araujo is a tough guy out there. He's very physical. He just has to work on making better decisions and to use that physicality a little bit more smart. And he goes, but he's young and he's going to learn that. And when he does, he's going to be really good. And I think that's one of the things that we have to look at Julian Araujo here is that I know, Kevin, you have some U.S. men's national team. I think you talked a little. I think Greg Berhalter was talking about Julian Araujo, but from the LA Galaxy perspective, you look at Julian Araujo and I say it's 50-50 that he leaves this winter, and then probably 75-25 that if he doesn't leave this winter, he leaves in the summertime. It's just, yes, he's young. Yes, he has a lot of development. Yes, the LA Galaxy would love to hold on to him for a little bit longer and do that, but somebody out there in world football is going to want to pay a whole bunch of money for him, and the LA Galaxy need to press the button whenever that happens. They need to take that money. And they need to let Julian Araujo go and develop into the player that he's going to be. And then whenever he's, 29, 30, he can come back and play right back for the LA Galaxy after having spent, a good almost 10 years playing in Europe. That's at least how I see it sort of playing out. So Julian Araujo is the real deal. I think we learned this season. And I think that's one of the important things I take away from this game and this season is that Julian Araujo is real.
No, I think he needs a couple of seasons more. I mean, I compare him to other great players, young players in MLS that have come through, like Almiron. When he came to Atlanta, people thought he was the finished product, and he needed a couple of years before he went to the Premier League. And Atlanta wound up getting a lot more money for him by waiting. You look at guys like Brian Rodriguez, who's at the same age, is one of the top assist leaders in MLS this season. He's on the Uruguayan national team in World Cup qualifiers. He has not gotten a lot of calls from Europe. So, is he a good player? Yeah, he's a really good player. I just think that he's showing he needs some discipline. He didn't get called up to the national team, and I know a lot of MLS players didn't get called up, but Greg Berhalter, in complimenting him, also sort of between the lines said he's not quite ready yet. I think Julian he's going to go somewhere at some point. I'm not as high on him as you are. I don't think he's quite finished yet. I think he's still a little rough.
Yes,
and he needs to be polished.
But that's exactly why somebody's going to take him, because if they wait on Julian Araujo, they have to spend a lot more money to get him later. right?
Which helps the Galaxy. I mean, my point would be the Galaxy should hang on to him and do some of that polishing here. Look at the difference between what Almiron got and what he would have got, or what Atlanta would have gotten after that first season. They waited a couple of years and got a lot more money. And I think you're seeing LAFC do the same thing with Diego Rossi. I think it would be to the Galaxy's benefit to hang on to him, maybe make him the starter next year. Rolf's not going to be back. Make him the starter. Let everybody see him play 34 games. He's still a teenager. Get a little bit of experience with the national team. Get to be in some of those really, really high pressure situations. And he's going to be worth a lot more. I could actually see him staying with the Galaxy through the World Cup and then going after the World Cup in Qatar.
Well, I mean, he was the starter this year. I mean, yes, Rolf Felcher may have started the season as the starter, but he was not the starter at the end of the season. Julian Araujo had to play some.
No, but he moved back.
Yeah,
he moved back and forth between the wing and right. I just think I think when you're scouting this guy, I think you want to you'd like to know that he has some versatility, but I think you want to say, can this guy play 38 games for us in the Bundesliga or wherever it is? Can he play that position a long time? But you know what? The other thing, now that you think about it, the position he's playing. I mean, where are some of the best American players, the guys that are going overseas? And making names for themselves? What position do they play? They play that outside back. You're talking about Serginho Dents and Tyler Adams. Chris Richards with Bayern Munich. Alphonso Davies on the other side. He's not American, but he played in MLS.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Yedlin.
what that.
Yedlin also was, the right back role that morphs into a right back and a right mid role. I mean, they're interchangeable right now in world soccer.
Right, and we thought Nick Lima was going to be that guy for the national team a couple of years ago, and he's sort of faded from the picture. But you used to think of American players, goalkeepers. That's what they were really good at. And you had Tim Howard and Brad Guzan, and a lot of those guys go over and play in Europe and do quite well. And then all of a sudden, there were some attacking players like Christian Pulisic, Josie Altidore before him.
Landon. Yeah, I was going to say Clint Dempsey, right?
But now, I mean, I think this has really sort of become that position for American players, or North American players anyways, that versatile outside back that can get up and down the field, use his athleticism. The soccer IQ needs to be high as well. But it's when you think about it, North American players have really kind of carved themselves a niche at that outside back / winger position.
Yeah, it is. So that was one of the things Dominic Kinnear. I thought it was interesting. Dominic Kinnear also was asked sort of what the LA Galaxy need to do, to sort of get better. And this was very much a, hey, Dom, you're the head coach, or you're the interim head coach, but if you're going to answer this question, then what does that? This is your chance to sort of lay out what your plan is. And Dominic Kinnear said, and I'll quote him from this from my article as well. It says, the league is evolving as we know. I think the players that are here have to hold themselves to a very high standard, which I think they do. But I think when you look back at the season for the group that comes back, it has to be understood that what has happened this year is well below standard. This team should not be below the playoff line when MLS is adding teams to the playoff picture. Everyone should be disappointed. If anybody walks away and thinks the season was a good one for them, I think they'd be mistaken. And then it's important for us as a group, for the technical staff, to look at the roster and try to improve upon that. There needs to be improvement in a lot of positions. But for us to be fighting for a playoff spot, for the LA Galaxy to be fighting for a playoff spot late in the year, for me, is not the story that should be told. And Dom was basically saying, this LA Galaxy, the LA Galaxy should never be fighting for a playoff spot. They should already be in the playoffs. And that was sort of his big take on that. But listen, he talks about the technical staff here, Kevin. I mean, clearly it's not surprising that when you put him in a head coaching role that he's going to look at the team and say there needs to be improvement. But what this also tells me is that Dominic Kinnear, looking at the roster that Guillermo Barros Schelotto and Dennis DeClosa put together, is incomplete. And I think Dennis would tell you that. I think Guillermo would tell you that. But at the same time, hearing it from the guy who was the assistant coach and is now the interim head coach and could possibly be the head coach, he's saying this roster wasn't good enough. It was incomplete, and we need to be better.
Well, you know what's really interesting about that is I talked to Dominic 2 years ago when I was doing a story on Ziggy Schmidt before Ziggy got fired, and I was talking about whether the Galaxy were on their way back, were they becoming the Galaxy of old, and Dominic gave a really good answer. He is very well versed in Galaxy tradition and the Galaxy culture. which, we've really gotten away from the Galaxy culture in the last 4 years. I think everyone can say that. I mean, what is the Galaxy now? What does it stand for? What style does it play? I don't think we really have a handle on that. But my point was that Dominic wasn't a guy who had coached in Houston and San Jose and just took a job. He knew what the Galaxy stood for. He knew, what it meant to wear that crest and to play in that stadium. I'm not sure that Guillermo ever knew that. And that's not a knock on Guillermo. If you're a coach at Boca Juniors, you don't have to know that stuff. But Dominic's been in MLS his whole life. He knows what that's about. I do think that's important because the team has gotten away from its culture, the culture that won 5 MLS titles. It needs to get back to that. And the easiest way to get back to it is to understand what it was before you take the job.
Yeah, it's super important. It's funny because you're getting a view from Dominic Kinnear of the LA Galaxy, and it's funny because you're going to get a view from the LA Galaxy from David Bingham as well. Coming from that San Jose and Houston perspective, and it's interesting to sort of see how those guys view things. So you got Dominic Kinnear sort of saying it. My big thing in asking questions after this was one to sort of see where everybody was standing. One of the things that happened was Sasha Kljestan spoke, Kevin, and I felt that it was important because Sasha is 35 years old, and as I tried to put as gracefully as possible, I said, you're closer to the end of the road than the beginning. I don't know. I'm sure those guys just want to smack me. Like, if it makes Sasha feel any better, I'm older than him, and I realize this every time I ask these questions. But I said, you're closer to the end of the road than the beginning. Have you given any thoughts to retiring, and will you be back with the LA Galaxy next year? And he told me very clearly, he said I've given no thought to retiring. He goes, I still feel like my body can handle it. He goes, I still feel good. He goes, it was difficult for me this year because of playing every 3 or 4 days. It's tough for my body to recover every 3 or 4 days. He goes, so that's something that didn't work out well for me this year. I think he was indicating, but that it was something that he could still do, and that his body just needed some rest and relaxation to sort of get back from that, and he'd be back. Now his other thing is, he also said he hoped to be back with the LA Galaxy next year. We're not quite sure where Sasha Kljestan's contract is. If it's a 2-year contract, he has another year left, but that's not always clear, and it very well could be 1 year plus an option for the LA Galaxy as well. So Sasha Kljestan could be technically out of a team and out of play if the LA Galaxy don't want to bring him back. I told that and stated that, Kevin, for people, and I got a lot of negative sort of responses to Sasha Kljestan staying with the LA Galaxy. And in my mind, this is something that people, and I think people who pay really close attention to the team, Kevin, fans and certainly media members, realize who the leaders are on teams, right? And you can say that Jonathan Dos Santos has the armband as the captain, or Javier Hernandez has the armband as the captain, but they're not leaders on this team. You can see that from whenever you talk to guys and whenever you see who they respect and who they talk to. To me, those guys aren't the guys who pop up first. I'll tell you, the guy who does pop up first for me is pretty obvious. Sasha Kljestan is the leader of this LA Galaxy team, and you're talking about a guy who didn't play a whole bunch of minutes this season. But the LA Galaxy needs somebody like that in the locker room. They need somebody like that who can come into the game. And by the way, Sasha Kljestan had a very, very good game in the second half when the LA Galaxy were playing 10v11 in this game. And that's what Sasha can bring you, is the ability to bring him in certain situations and let him sort of thrive. And I think in the last 2 or 3 games, you saw Sasha Kljestan catches, get his feet underneath him, catch his breath, and start to really play in a system that Dominic Kinnear sets up and that has, I think, put a bunch of people in more success. So I think anybody who's negative on Sasha Kljestan, certainly you can say he's not as quick as he used to be. That is, I think he would be the first one to tell you that. But when you look at Sasha Kljestan, for me, Kevin, he's a no-brainer to bring back into the locker room. You need somebody like that. You need somebody like, an AJ De La Garza. You need somebody like a Juninho whenever you brought Juninho. Sometimes guys are important just for being in the locker room. And while you don't want to waste a spot on that, Kevin, you need those guys. Somebody needs to be the leader.
Well, and I think the frustration he talked about, was evident, in answering your question. He was not brought in to pay, like you said, he wasn't brought in here to play 2,000 minutes. He was brought in to be the leader in the clubhouse, as you said, the leader in the dressing room. And we're starting to, I think we've always suspected this since mid-season, since the end of the Orlando tournament, but it really came to light, I think, at the end of the year that it was not a harmonious dressing room, that there were some issues there, maybe some of that emanating from the coaching staff, but it wasn't the locker room that Sasha Kljestan was brought in to sort of preside over. And I think he feels a little bit of responsibility, a little bit of disappointment that he wasn't able to unite everybody. And I think that as much as this regular season record probably weighs on him a little bit, I think he does want to be and need to be that leader. And I think he'd like to get another shot at that. I think if you were able to speak to him off the record freely, I think he'd probably tell you that he felt like some of that was taken away from him, that maybe his leadership power is a little bit undermined by some people from outside the locker room. And my guess is he doesn't want to go out that way. He wants to give it another shot.
Yeah, I think those are good classifications of sort of if you want to read between the lines on that stuff. I think a lot of this is reading between the lines. My second goal from after the game was to find out about these guys who had now been playing. We talked about it last time. Dominic Kinnear was in charge after Siggy Schmidt had left, Kevin. But you get somebody like Dom come in, and there is a difference in styles. And I think I asked Perry Kitchen the difference in styles. And it wasn't so much, tell me the difference in the styles, but what do you notice with Dominic Kinnear? Why should he be considered for the head coaching? And it was funny because Perry Kitchen and David Bingham both said flat out that they thought Dominic Kinnear should be the coach. Now, they're also both starting under Dominic Kinnear, which we should point out. And with David Bingham, he's been he's had Dominic Kinnear as a coach before up in San Jose. So there's some links here. So you can't just take it 100%. But at the same time, I feel like anybody you would talk to in the locker room would probably tell you these same things. So Perry Kitchen said, I think the guys respond very well to how Dom wants to set up the team. I think he seriously has to be considered for the role. He's a great coach. He's a great guy. Again, that's up to the leadership, but he definitely had control of the locker room, and the guys respect him very much so. Kevin, I didn't ask them to contrast and compare between Guillermo Barros Schelotto and Dominic Kinnear, but anything that I read here seems like it's set up in that way to where they're telling me what was wrong with Guillermo Barros Schelotto. That's how I'm taking it. Now I could be reading into that and connecting dots that don't need to be connected, but when you hear that he has control of the locker room, that's not something that just pops up into somebody's head like randomly where you're like, oh yeah, well every coach should have control of the locker room, right? So why did that come out? And if we're going to parse every word, that to me is a telling word. He had a telling couple of words. He had control over the locker room, and when you link that with stuff that David Bingham said as well, I think it even opens up at least my eyes a little bit wider. Do you think I'm being crazy on that?
No, but there's a couple of things. There's a couple of stylistic things. Should the coach have control of the locker room? Not necessarily. A lot of coaches in a lot of different sports never go into the locker room or don't like to spend a lot of time there. They feel like that's the players' thing, and that's where a Sasha Kljestan comes in to being, or back in a couple of years ago with the Dodgers and A.J. Ellis or somebody like that. The locker room is where the players are, and that's where they talk and discuss things. And coaches don't like to go in there because they want the players to be able to speak freely, and maybe they're criticizing the coach. So, you can say he didn't have control of the locker room, but then you can also say maybe he's not supposed to. I know when Dominic was, one of the reasons Dominic was given the job when Ziggy was fired was because near the end, especially, Dominic was the guy that went in the locker room and talked to the players and delivered Ziggy's messages. Ziggy did not spend a lot of time in the locker room, was my understanding, and that's how Dominic, got a relationship with a lot of these players. So, just the fact that Dominic has that relationship really helped him when he did come into the locker room. The players already had a relationship with him and respected him. So, and you did hear Bingham talk about how, he thought that there was an accountability, right? Well, not so much the accountability part of it, but the fact that some players were treated differently than others. And that is the one thing that will blow up a locker room faster than anything else. And that's one of the things we were very critical at the end of last season with some of the things that went down with Schelotto in the locker room. And that was part of it, that, there was a lot on rules and there was rules for everybody else. Is that fair? Yes. He's the only one in that a locker room that scored 500 goals for club and country. He's
Right.
the only one in that locker room that was one of the three greatest players of his generation. So that makes a little bit of sense. I don't know that if Chicharito was the player that had a different set of rules, and it's sort of, some of the indications kind of point that way. I think a lot of the players like Sasha Kljestan have been on a World Cup team, and Jonathan Dos Santos, maybe he supported him. He's been on 3 World Cup teams. Some of those guys were looking at that and saying, well, wait a minute, that's not Zlatan. That guy is kind of in our area code. We're kind of close to him. Why does he get these different rules? And that's the one thing that'll blow up a locker room quicker than anything else. And Dominic, again, he is a guy that's been around. He is a guy that has these relationships with these players. It's a stylistic difference. And I think one big thing with the Galaxy, I was talking to Kurt Onafo a couple of days ago. And by the way, did you know he had COVID in January? He was one of the first people in the country to get COVID. He's recovered. Everything's fine. But I found that interesting. Anyway, he was telling me that, when he took over as coach in 2017, he got 20 games. And then they let him go, and then they took Ziggy. His thing was young players. The young players loved him. Steris, Romney, all those guys, swore by Kurt Onafo. He came in and he tried to implement his style. He was only given 20 games and he's fired. Then they bring Ziggy in and they go completely in a different direction. Ziggy doesn't last the full season. Then they bring in Guillermo, another direction. That doesn't work out. Guillermo makes it only through one season. The Galaxy, whether it's Dom or whomever, they need to settle on a culture and a style and kind of stick with it, because I'm sure if you talk to the players that have been there in that locker room through all this, and that would be Steris and Leggett, they'll tell you that sometimes they're not quite sure what end is up. It's just bouncing from one extreme to the other. And the Galaxy need to really settle on a game plan and a style and stick with it and see if they can make it work, without changing everything, every other season.
Yeah, let's get to Bingham's comments, and then we'll continue this conversation. So here's what Bingham had to say whenever he was asked if Dominic Kinnear should be considered for the head coaching spot. He said, 100%, I think. He goes, obviously, I played with him before in San Jose, so I have the benefit of knowing what it's like under him. But at the end of the day, when the LA Galaxy were at their peak, by the way, this next part is so interesting to me, and I think I agree 100%. But just listen, again, I said you were going to get the outsider's perspective, the San Jose, the Houston perspective of the LA Galaxy and what needs to happen. Here's David Bingham sort of talking about what the LA Galaxy did during their heyday. He goes, and I quote, but at the end of the day, when the LA Galaxy were at their peak, they had an American coach that had fairly simple tactics, and then they put a team on the field that was competitive and were able to bring home championships. And when you try and replicate that model, I think Dom fits that mold better than anyone. He goes, I believe he's in the top 3 of most wins in MLS history, which is correct. Kevin made sure I got that. I think in my story I said top 4 because I thought Bradley had 1, but he had tied. And he says, so I believe he's in the top 3 for most wins in MLS history, and he knows what it takes to win in this league. And if you gave him the Galaxy with the resources the Galaxy have, I think there's no limit to what he can do with it. That's super interesting to me whenever you look at what his view of the LA Galaxy was under Bruce Arena, and I can't disagree with that. We talked about Dominic Kinnear, I think even last week, Kevin. We talked about Dominic Kinnear making things simple, and I know for sure on our Thursday show I said it again, but simplicity doesn't always mean easy to play against. Simplicity can just mean to calming all the voices in your head and giving you one sort of thought to concentrate on, and that thought makes you better. And in my mind, that's what Dominic Kinnear does better than anybody else. I think that's what Bruce Arena also did, and probably still does, is give guys their best chance at succeeding by giving them sort of a clear idea of what's expected of them and what their role is. This isn't Boca Juniors where, Guillermo Barros Schelotto had so many world-class talents on it that you could say, well, you know how to play soccer. I'm just here to give you, sort of the upper-level stuff. I mean, we can pretend that Major League Soccer is some great league, but it has a lot of growing pains to come with it, and the majority of the mid to lower level roster players still need just some basic stuff to sort of, it's not basic tactics, but it's like basic ideas. Don't try to be this upper level art form. Do something that is going to be able to get done and be replicated and have some consistency to it, because if you look at the LA Galaxy throughout this time, there's been no consistency since really 2015, 2016 in those areas. You haven't seen the consistency. So for me, one, looking at what David Bingham thinks of the LA Galaxy during their peak, and 2, thinking of Dominic Kinnear and what he could bring for that. I mean, there's some good arguments to have Dominic Kinnear, sort of be that guy. Is that out of line, Kevin?
Well, a thought I had on going back to the locker room thing, and I'll just make this statement, and then you can take it and edit it and put it back into that part of the conversation seamlessly, like you do.
Right.
Another thing, when you parse the comments of some of these players, and Chicharito sort of talked about Guillermo and wishing he could have done more for Guillermo, and they all say it wasn't Guillermo's fault, but then they talk about Sebastian Lletget did this too. It really wasn't Guillermo's fault. We feel really bad about it, but now we're moving forward. A little bit of that, there's some truth to that. I think some players probably felt Guillermo could have done things differently. He did do a lot of good things, I think, for some players. But another part of that too that you can't dismiss is if the players come out and say, yeah, the coach was the greatest coach we ever had, we screwed up, then that basically the players are throwing themselves under the bus. They're not going to do that. So you are going to hear a lot of players talk about how things are better since Guillermo left and they're going in the right direction. And golly gee, if they just had a whole year with him, how much better they would have been. I'm not sure how much if I take that 100%, because it does seem a little bit like, deflecting the blame. But you're right about the whole thing with sort of the American coach. And I made the point in the last pod about the Galaxy wanting to go out and maybe get somebody sexy, and that means like a European coach with a pedigree. After Ziggy Schmidt was fired, we had a long talk one day, and he was showing me some old coaching manuals and books that he had from the 50s and early 60s. And a lot of the stuff that we think of as cutting edge soccer, they were talking about those things back then. And Ziggy said, a lot of the older American coaches, and he's talking about Bob Bradley and himself and Dominic, who's only 52, and Bruce, he said, we get maligned because we're not that sort of the flavor of the month and we don't have, these great European pedigrees. He goes, but we're coaching the same game. So a lot of times when you go out and say, we're going to bring in this coach from Boca Juniors and he knows all these styles of playing and he's really had all the success in South America, a lot of times the guy in North America who's a little bit of a plain vanilla coach is coaching the same way. He just doesn't call attention to it. And I kind of think Dom's in that mold. He's a quiet guy. He doesn't call a lot of attention to himself. He keeps it simple, but you're right. Putting guys in a position to succeed. The last thing you want to do is take a guy who can't play as a left back or a left winger and make him do that, because the team is not going to succeed that way and the player is going to be unhappy and he's not going to play his best game. You need to find a player that can play the position you want, and that has a lot to do with putting the roster together too. You can't do these things where, we need a third forward. Well, we'll just take this guy who used to be a left back and we'll make him a forward if we need to. You have to put players in positions to succeed. It makes them happy. It makes the team play better. It makes the coach look better. And when a team is struggling, as the Galaxy have, Dominic was absolutely right. Keep it simple. Go back to the beginning. Everyone's played a 4-4-2 or a variant of that. Kind of start there and work off that as your model. And, Bruce was the one that always talked about formations really don't mean anything because when they kick the ball off, everybody moves.
Yeah, that was 100%. No, there's, again, it's funny because, and I will cop to this, and I've copped to this many times. I grew up in the Church of Bruce Arena. The guy who I covered for so many years was Bruce Arena. So you're talking about the guy who taught me about soccer was Bruce Arena. I obviously I understood the game. I know, but I can't say that my understanding of the game didn't grow because of watching what Bruce Arena did and how he does things. And so I'm sure that, in that way, it puts me very much in an MLS, 1.0 or 2.0 mindset for a lot of these things. Having said that, there's some things that Bruce Arena did whenever he came in 2008 and into the 2009 season that Dominic Kinnear now has a chance to do as well. I mean, you do have some fractured locker rooms. You do have some relationships you have to, repair. And I have to wonder, just with the way that Chicharito comes out after Guillermo Barros Schelotto is fired and sort of is all pointed in one direction and now he's sorry and all these things, the timing just seems weird enough to me to look at this and say that it feels like, Chicharito didn't get along with Guillermo Barros Schelotto. That's me guessing. And sort of looking at things, but I can't stare there and look at what Chicharito did under, GBS, and then all of a sudden what he's been able to do just in, a couple games under Dominic Kinnear. There has been a change. There is a change, and even if it's temporary for 2 games, I have seen an increased work rate. I've seen an increase in just the ability to get on the ball and to move into positions. I've seen that. So when David Bingham tells you stuff in here as well, again, I didn't ask him to say anything about Guillermo Barros Schelotto, but I have to feel that when he's talking, about Dominic Kinnear and what he can do, that he is saying something about the team, because, these are the positive things that he sees of Dominic Kinnear where they were negative before. That sort of goes back to Perry Kitchen saying, he has control of the locker room, and I understand where you're coming from, but in order for Perry to think of control of the locker room as a positive, it makes me think that the locker room was out of control before. And again, maybe that's just diving into things too far, but here's what David Bingham's had to say about Kinnear and sort of what made him different as a coach. And David Bingham says, and I quote, "I think he kind of speaks the player's language. He knows what buttons to push at the right time, and Dom holds every player to the same accountability. When you look at how other coaches coach, and some players have different levels of accountability, it never really works throughout the team. Some players feel gypped or whatnot. Dom holds everyone accountable. It doesn't matter if you're a DP making $10 million or if you're a minimum salary guy. He doesn't care. He holds a standard across the board, and players respect that. And I think you can just see how the attitude switched when he came in. Just the respect he demands, and he simplifies the game for you, and then you play better." So, David Bingham talking after the game there. Again, there's so many things that I could say. I mean, so the accountability, and we sort of touched on this before, is, it seems like there were players who weren't being held to accountability, and you can argue about guys like, and I remember Robbie Keane sort of had some different rules, and Bruce Arena was pretty straightforward on that. If you trained, you could play, and they all did, but, there's also stories of Robbie Keane quitting after a scrimmage in training because his team lost. Right? And he was like, "Screw this, I'm out of here. If you guys aren't going to play and we're not going to win, then I'm going to leave." And, that to me is like one of those things as a coach where you sit there and say, well, that's your guy right there, and he's leaving because you guys aren't trying. I mean, those can be like motivational. But if you have guys who are not held to the same sort of level, and I think Bruce held everybody really to the same amount of level. He expected the same on game day from everybody. And if you didn't give that and you didn't prove yourself, then you didn't get to play. And so I think it has to tell me that there were some people on this team, as we've said before, Kevin, that were not being held accountable, that were not doing what everybody else was doing. They had different rules than everybody else, and that makes the locker room a bad place to be.
Well, I'm going to go back on something that I said earlier when I talked about it's very important that everyone be treated the same in the locker room. You actually said what I meant. You said it in a much better way. It's the holding people accountable, because Bruce did say, and I've heard other managers say it too, you don't treat everyone the same, which is the word I used, and I misspoke. You don't treat everyone the same, because clearly you're going to treat Robbie Keane differently than you're going to treat, Ari Lassiter. They have come to your team from different things. They've accomplished different things, and so they get treated differently. But it's that accountability. So maybe Robbie Keane doesn't have to be on the field 10 minutes before training starts like Ari Lassiter does, but he's expected to put in an effort in every game and training, and he's not allowed to leave early. That's the kind of thing that I meant, and that you said much better. It's the accountability. Maybe Robbie doesn't have to stretch as long as the other players do, but he needs to put in the effort when training starts. And if players aren't doing that, then that's a problem. And I do find Chicharito's sort of mea culpa coming out now after Guillermo was fired. I find it very interesting, because it does suggest that perhaps they didn't get along. But you were there when I had this conversation with someone from the Galaxy who was off the record, so it's going to remain nameless who it was. But one of the things that this person pointed out to me was, he said, "Did you see Chicharito's Instagram post? What did you think about that?" And I said, "Yeah, I saw it, and I thought it was a little bit too late. It coming after the coach's firing. I mean, we're 20 some games into the season, and now all of a sudden he's saying, you know what, I'm going to try harder." And the Galaxy person was really taken back by that, and it led me to the conclusion that this whole social media campaign that Chicharito's on, and he's spoken now to the media twice in the last 2 games, which he hadn't spoken for months before that, is part of a public relations campaign just to sort of say, yeah, we're all going to take responsibility now. Even Chicharito is going to, fess up and admit that he's had a rough season. And, he has, but I'm going to give Chicharito a little bit of a break. There's been a lot of stuff going on with him this year. And I'm not even talking about the stuff from Mexico. I'm talking about his grandfather, who he was very close to, died early in the season. He was stranded away from his family because of COVID. His wife had the baby. He had the 2 injuries. So there was a lot of stuff going on with Chicharito. Doesn't explain or excuse his season, but it does give him a little bit of cover if he comes off looking a little distracted. But waiting until the 22nd game or 21st game of the season to come out and say, you know what, guys, I really haven't been playing as well as I could. That to me seemed a little bit, tone deaf.
Yeah, the timing just feels weird. It just, again, a lot of times this isn't about, what is actually happening, but the optics of what is happening, right? What does it look like? What does it sound like? And you look at Chicharito, and by the way, I put out the stats today, and I've kept these stats for a while, so this is nothing new, but this certainly started because the LA Galaxy have had a history of designated players not playing. And I asked Dennis DeClosa this. If you didn't catch Thursday's interview with Dennis DeClosa, we got about 30, I think, really good minutes from Dennis. And I'm not going to say he answered every question I wanted the way that I would have liked him to answer, but he at least attempted to answer those questions. And sometimes he hit on some stuff that was really important, and sometimes, I think he talked his way around stuff. And I understand all that. I mean, looking at Chicharito, he played 38.3% of the total available minutes. So in 22 games, if you multiply that by 90 minutes, it's 1,980 minutes, Kevin. Easy math on that. Javier played in 12 games, started 7 games, played a total of 758 minutes. So that's 38.3% of the total minutes. Jonathan Dos Santos, which, by the way, good trivia question for you all, only played 35.4% of it. He actually played less minutes than Chicharito, which seems impossible, but he played
fewer.
Oh, sorry, fewer minutes. Games played. He played in 13 games. Jonathan Dos Santos. He played in more games, played fewer minutes. Games started 7 was the same for both of them. About 58 less minutes for Jonathan Dos Santos on that. And then we talked about Cristian Pavón earlier. Every minute of every game. So if you look at the LA Galaxy, 60% of the time the LA Galaxy had their designated players playing in that. So they played almost 60% of the total available minutes, 57.9%. But you look at Cristian. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say they only started 4 games together. So and they played 22.
Yep. Yeah. No. It's crazy. But seriously, if you take out Cristian Pavón from this designated player list, again, every minute, every game, started everything. Cristian Pavón was absolutely outstanding this year. But if you do that, you end up with like a 37% average for the other 2 designated players on this team. You can't have that. We've said it before with Roman Alessandrini, and Roman, got run out of town basically because he couldn't stay healthy. So Jonathan Dos Santos could not stay healthy this year, and he's had that problem before. Javier Hernandez, you spend, $6 million, $5 million, $6 million plus, almost $10 million in transfer fee, and you got 758 minutes and 2 goals out of him. I mean, the ridiculousness of what happened to the LA Galaxy starts right here, which is that you had 2 designated players who basically did not play this year. And when you look at that, and you look at the scouting that it takes and the people that they expected to be, and then the medical staff and everything else, you have to say it's a failure across the entire organization that this has been a problem for the LA Galaxy. They cannot keep designated players healthy. They cannot keep them on the field. And whenever you go back to the days when the LA Galaxy had great designated players and had success on the field, it was because those guys played, a lot of minutes towards the successful time. David Bingham had some injuries before that, didn't play, was on loan to a whole bunch of places, and look at the LA Galaxy struggled. When your most expensive players are not on the field, this isn't a shock, Kevin. When your most expensive players are not on the field, you do not play well. And I think that's a huge issue the LA Galaxy have to sort of right. But specifically with Javier, Kevin, you owe Chicharito, another $10 or $12 million over the next 2 years. If it's a total 3-year contract, people are saying get rid of Chicharito. Well, the LA Galaxy would have to eat that. And they've already eaten about $16 million with the transfer fee and his salary for this year, although I'm sure it's less than that because of the pandemic and a whole bunch of other reasons. But whenever you look at that, that's what they agreed to pay him. So you do that and you get 2 goals in 758 minutes. He can be injured. He can have problems. All those things can be. But I'm telling you, the Chicharito that the LA Galaxy got for most of this year, for the first 5 games that he started, or for the first, let's say he played 12 games, so the first 10 games of this year wasn't even better than Ethan Zubak. And I listen, that's not to get down on Ethan Zubak, but I think we all know the difference between Chicharito, or what Chicharito is supposed to be, and what Ethan Zubak is supposed to be.
Well, yeah, and this is where you and I are going to diverge a little bit in that Chicharito has 1 year for sure, and I think I'm not sure if it's 1 year and an option or 2 years, but in any case, there's a $12 million out there that he's probably going to have to get paid in addition to the transfer fee, which was just about $10 million. He could wind up, if he extends beyond that, he could wind up being the most expensive player in franchise history, but there are $12 million on the table that the Galaxy have to give him regardless of what happens going forward. And as you said, you can't afford, with a salary cap and MLS salary structure, what it is, you can't afford to just waste that money. That's why I think whatever coach comes in next needs to have a good relationship with Chicharito, needs to be able to understand him and find a way to get the best out of him, because you're not going to sit $6 million on the bench. You're not going to buy him out and let him go. That worked out with Gio, but that's not going to work every time. I do think the next coach coming in, Chicharito, I don't think Chicharito gets a say in who the coach is the way Kobe Bryant did, but I think there has to be a reasonable expectation that the two are going to be able to get together. And to me, that works in Dominic's favor, because they already do have a relationship, and Dom has seemed to be able to get something out of him in these last two games. I don't think you bring a coach in unless you have a feeling that they're going to be able to get along with Chicharito and get something out of him.
I will say this. I won't blast you as hard as I did whenever you told me what you were going to say before we started recording, and only because I think you parsed it. He doesn't get a say. I agree with that 100%. He does not get a say. Quite honestly, I don't care what Chicharito thinks. His job is to be out there to play and perform. Now, you want to get the best out of him, and I think you're right. So, finding somebody he can work with is important. But, the last time the LA Galaxy went down the path of trying to appease a player with any sort of coach, it was, Ruud Gullit and David Beckham, and that was a disaster. And it wasn't until Bruce Arena came in and repaired those things. And quite honestly, Bruce Arena didn't care that it was David Beckham. And he treated David Beckham like he treated Landon Donovan, which was better than everybody else, but just not that much better. Everybody could get yelled at, and I think that's something that Chicharito needs to understand, is that he needs to perform regardless of who this coach is. Certainly, you want to put him in the best light, but he doesn't get a say. It doesn't matter, where this coach has been. It doesn't have to be a Mexican coach. It doesn't have to be, a South American coach. It could be Dominic Kinnear, and Dominic Kinnear can, I think, do these things. I'm telling you right now, barring any serious inquiries from anybody else, and by the way, I love that there are coaches out there who have declined the LA Galaxy. If you're going to take Dennis Teclosa on his word, Kevin, Dennis told me specifically that as of last Thursday, he had not talked to any head coaching candidates. Right? Hadn't picked up the phone, hadn't talked to anybody. So these people who are already turning the LA Galaxy down, either they did it because Dennis had sent emails out and not phone calls, and they somehow got around the question that way, or they hear about it and somebody says, "Hey, would you take the LA Galaxy job?" And they're like, "No, I'm not going to take it." Mostly probably because you haven't been offered the job, you haven't been discussed the job is not out there for you yet. So looking at all those things is, you need to go in. The Galaxy need to make the best decision for this club, period. I don't care about Chicharito. I don't care about Jonathan Dos Santos. I don't care about any other player on that team. I don't care David Bingham. Nobody. They don't get to decide where this team is going. And so far, the LA Galaxy have chosen wrong. I almost feel like it's Indiana Jones. You have chosen, poorly. And then you turn into a skeleton and you go away. And that movie is now old enough that it's probably dating me. But everybody has watched Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, right? That's not a... Kevin, you've watched that movie.
What's it about again?
Are you serious? Don't make me explain Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. If
Will Ferrell's not in it, I probably haven't seen it.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah.
But you know what? In saying all that, I'm going to... We don't have nearly as enough time to chew on this next issue, but I just want to get it on the record that all this talk about the coach and Chicharito, we've been there before. We've talked about the coach when Ziggy came in and when Ziggy went out. We talked about designated players when Gio came in and when Gio went out. We've had these discussions before. The one thing that hasn't changed, there hasn't been any significant moves in the front office. Yes, Pete Vianis was fired. He was made the scapegoat after the second season, but the Galaxy have changed coaches now 4 times in 4 seasons. They've made the playoffs once in that time. During the last 4 years, they have had more losses, 56 or 57, than any 4-year period in history. You can look at any number you want, any barometer of how they performed in the last 4 years, and they're at the bottom. 6 years without an MLS Cup final appearance. Just changing the coach, or even making a move with the general manager, and I do think that Dennis, should be allowed to say and should be safe. But if you're just doing the same thing and you're expecting a different result, that's the old cliche. That's the definition of insanity. they need to do more. They need to do something to change the culture. I'm not calling for anyone to be fired, but I'm just saying that it has to go beyond the on-field staff and players, because they've changed all that before. They've gone through 66 players in the last 4 years. Same results.
Yeah.
What hasn't happened is a front office shakeup. And if that doesn't happen, I'm not sure how you repair the culture and how you get people to realize that this is serious.
Well, I'm going to say this. The LA Galaxy do have a conference call scheduled for Wednesday on November 11th. That will have General Manager Dennis DeClosa and LA Galaxy President Chris Klein on it. So maybe we'll get some more answers whenever that press conference happens. I know everybody was sort of talking about it today. It's an interesting part of that. One of the things we were going to do, Kevin, is sort of go over the roster and sort of take some things. We're going to push that off for another day because we still have some stuff I want to get to before we're totally done here. I wanted to get to some LA Galaxy stats, certainly that I know you've compiled, and I think you've spit out a couple of them during this time, and I know I've spit out a couple of them during this time as well, but I wanted to get to sort of, showing you where this LA Galaxy team sits and how it compares to some of their other seasons like I like to do. It's worth noting the LA Galaxy finished 10th out of 12 teams in the Western Conference, and they finished 20th out of 26 teams in the entire overall standings. So when you look at those two things, I think that puts the LA Galaxy in where they have been in a pretty important light there. It's something to look at. Now, one of the things I've been sort of looking at is trying to compare this LA Galaxy season with others, and obviously the short amount of games and other things have sort of made that difficult to do, just because you can't just straight up look at it and say, oh yeah, absolutely, you can compare the 2017 LA Galaxy to the 2020 because the different amount of games and different things sort of look. So I did end up going to some percentages and sort of looking at things. So on win percentage, the worst win percentage in LA Galaxy history, Kevin, came in the 2017 season. The LA Galaxy in 2017 won 23.5% of their games. All right. Now the 2020 team is the second worst in LA Galaxy history out of their 25 seasons. Their win percentage this year was 27.3%. So when you look at that, I think that puts you in a pretty stark sort of understanding of where this LA Galaxy team is. Of course, it gets worse because losing percentage, if you want to talk about the highest losing percentage of any team, it was this 2020 team. They lost 54.5% of their total games, and the second place team in that was the 2017 LA Galaxy, who lost 52.9% of their total games. Now let's get to I think is a very important percentage that I don't think people take into account enough, but to point out, we're going to look at the result, right? How many times did the LA Galaxy get a point or better? And if you compare all 25 seasons, the best team the LA Galaxy ever had was the 2011 team. And that result, they got a result 85.3% of the time. All right, that also goes along with a losing percentage of 14.7% and a win percentage of 55.9%. So, I mean, some seriously big numbers. 2016 actually is the second best result-oriented team, which is interesting. 82.4% of the time they got a result of a point or better. So just sort of comparing that. If you go to 2020, it is the worst in the result table. The LA Galaxy only managed to get a result 45.5% of the time. So by any measure and by sort of these metrics you put in there, the LA Galaxy in 2020 didn't have a great year, Kevin. I think that's the understatement of those statistics.
No, and again, this is the second year of a 3-year rebuilding process. You would have expected them perhaps not to win the MLS Cup, but to make some progress over last year when they made the playoffs. Instead, they regressed. They were one of, I think, 3-4 teams in MLS of the 26 teams to go to the final day of the regular season without a chance to make the playoffs. That's not progress. When they made the playoffs last year and actually won their first playoff game since 2016. So they're not moving in the right direction.
No, they're not. Let's go to points, and we can compare every season the LA Galaxy have ever played through 22 games. I have those stats, and I can look at that. So through 22 games, there was only one season that was worse than the LA Galaxy through these 22 games that they played this year, and that was 2007. So 22 points in 2020, and in 2007 they had 17 points. If you go back to 2017, which everybody sort of agrees is a fairly horrible year, the LA Galaxy had 23 points through 22 games. So just sort of looking at that, again, a way to sort of measure the LA Galaxy and say, okay, again, not good enough.
Right. It's not good enough. And again, not making progress. I mean, I think that's kind of the key fact. If it's a 3-year rebuilding project, you have to make progress.
Yeah,
I think the whole point.
I think the LA Galaxy would tell you to trust the process, Kevin. And in this case, the process is them going in reverse. One more thing that I think, or two more stats that I pulled up, the LA Galaxy average points per game. So one of the things we can do is, take your points per game average and say, how good were you across all the other seasons? The LA Galaxy finished with 1.00 points per game in 2020, 22 games, 22 points. In 2017, the LA Galaxy finished with a 0.94 points per game record, which was the worst in LA Galaxy history. So it remains the LA Galaxy in 2020 have the second worst points per game average of any LA Galaxy team to have ever played. The differences between 2017 and 2020 to me are vast and numerous, and at the same time, this 2020 team seems to have done worse and worse. Maybe they could have turned it around had they had more games, Kevin. I have no idea, but certainly when you look at this, it gives you the idea that no, they may have gotten worse if they played more games. The only other thing that I sort of wanted to hit before we get on out of here was the goal projection, and it's something that I tried to say, hey, if you're going to score 34 goals, or if you're going to play 34 games, how many goals would you have given up? So it's sort of a straight projection. The LA Galaxy in 22 games, gave up or scored 27 goals and conceded 46. If you project that out, they were scheduled, or at least projected, to get 41.7 goals in 2020 through a 34-game season. The 41 isn't the worst, but it's only 4 from the bottom of the worst. Whenever you look at 2006 had 37 goals, 2007 had 38, and this one's interesting. 2009 they go to an MLS Cup and they only had 36 goals scored for them, but had a very good defense that year as well. So projected against historical on the goals against. Yeah, hold, let me get this, and then you can go. 71.1 is the amount of goals the LA Galaxy were projected to give up if they played 34 games. They ended up giving 46 goals in their 22 games. So if you project that out, it's 71.1, and that would be the highest. For sure. 2017, they gave up 67 goals. 2018, 64 goals. And 2008, they gave up 62 goals. So 71 projected would be the worst ever goals against for the LA Galaxy.
Yeah, I was going right where you were going because it was a shortened season, the shortest season in MLS history, by the way. And not everybody even played the 23 games. Colorado only played 18. But over the last 4 years, again, going back to after Bruce left and all these experiments started, the Galaxy have given up 236 goals in a 4-year period. I don't even know what to say about that. I mean, 236 goals, and in this season, you didn't even play a full season. That's pretty remarkable. An average of 59 goals a year. Yeah,
I was going to say, I was trying to do the math real quick and divide it by 4. Yeah, 59 goals per year.
Yeah, I mean, you're not Steve Kornacki. Don't try that.
Yeah, I was going to say I won't do it in my head. But no, I mean, it's been a comedy of errors, and we've talked about the LA Galaxy defense. A place, by the way, they have invested some money over the last 3 or 4 years. They have tried to bring in people. They have brought people in. We talked about Insua. We talked about Pipo Gonzalez. We talked about Michael Ciani, Yellow Van Dam. I mean, they have not spent money on defense, but yet they don't seem to be able to get it together. And I certainly think a weakened midfield is a big reason the LA Galaxy give up a lot of goals. I mean, Dominic Kinnear talked about the third goal and said it's inexcusable that we gave up that third goal. I know we were pressing. I know we were trying to do it, but it's just simple mistakes. He goes, I can fix that. Basically, paraphrasing things. He's like, you can see it. I know how to teach that, and it's something that we needed to get better at, and we didn't. So, it's just.
You bring up a really good point about the spending. Yes, they have spent money, and I think that's a point that needs to be made because the Galaxy, the brass there get very anxious when you start talking about them being cheap and not spending, which, by the way, in 2017, they clearly did. They clearly did try to take another approach financially, and they did get pretty cheap that year, and it didn't work out. But I mean, since then, they have spent money. I mean, they gave Zlatan the richest contract in MLS history. They made the richest transfer payment that they ever have in franchise history to get Chicharito. So they have spent money. They just haven't spent it wisely, and it doesn't seem to go together. I mean, they seem to be spending money on pieces rather than trying to spend the money on making the mold fit. And that's where we go back to second year of a 3-year rebuilding project, and they're not making any progress. That's because I don't think they're following a blueprint. I think they're just throwing things against the wall to see what sticks. And again, that's not going to work. Spending money is great, but you need to spend it wisely, and you need to spend it on pieces that are going to fit with one another.
Yeah, you make. I mean, that's sort of you can be frivolous with your money and not make it last. You can not do some of your homework. I mean, we can go back to the LA Galaxy not doing their homework. Go back to Jelle Van Damme, which was that they didn't understand that his family was going through a divorce and that he was going to miss his kids, and his kids were back at home, and that was going to be a factor. That's always a factor. You need to understand that. Look at Alexander Katai, and there were hints and problems with him in Chicago, but the LA Galaxy didn't do their homework on him. They didn't understand 100% what they were getting, and it ended up biting them. And you can say that was unforeseen, and how would you listen? There are red flags there. You probably should have been able to figure out some of those things. I mean, you can even go to Javier Hernandez and say that there were probably some red flags here that should have showed up pretty quickly about what was going on and whether or not you could have intervened and done anything to change the course of the season. And did you? And you didn't. And basically, this is where you're at for the LA Galaxy. So a lot of things have to change and go in a different direction for the Galaxy. One of those things is getting a head coach. Dennis talked about it on our show on Thursday, which is, yes, we want to do this. He didn't want to give a timeline, which I understand. He goes, you don't want to rush it. You want to make sure you get the right one. But at the same time, there's roster decisions that have to be made, and you would like to have a head coach in there helping you make these roster decisions, so that way they can have some ownership of this as well. So if I'm the LA Galaxy, I wrap this up more quickly than probably people would expect, because basically FC Cincinnati, by the way, sort of led MLS out of the into the off season by releasing their roster decisions, who they picked up, options declined, all that type of thing. And they said, as happens, as soon as it's over, we release the information. And it's like, well, that's not how the LA Galaxy do it, and that's not how most of the league does it. So I went back and actually looked the last couple of years of when the LA Galaxy announced their roster decisions, Kevin, and they always announced them on the deadline that was provided by Major League Soccer. And I have not seen an off-season calendar yet for Major League Soccer, so I can't predict when that will be for the LA Galaxy, when you'll start to see that. But it's usually been about 30 days after the end of the season for those clubs. So I can look back here and say, on Thursday, November 21st, roster decisions in 2019 came. I look back and said Monday, November 27th, roster decisions in 2017 were made. So it's just, you got to look at that and say, okay, about 30 days. So the Galaxy have about 30 days to find a head coach if they want them as part of that, and less than that, because really you should have a plan before you go into options declined, options picked up, all those interesting roster moves that you have to make in Major League Soccer to sort of, let the guys get all their information and their heads up before the season's over.
Well, let me push back on that a little bit because of just what we just talked about, having a plan. It may seem like, it's the chicken or the egg, but if you hire a manager and then try to build the team around him, then every time you change managers, you have to restructure the team. I think it would be smarter for Dennis in the front office to say, this is our culture. This is the way we're going to go forward. This is our team. Build your team, because this is MLS again. It's not Manchester City where you can go out and buy any player in the world you want to fit your coach's his style. I think if we're in the middle of this rebuilding project, and we take Dennis at his word, and we're building the academy and doing those things, it would seem to me that you want to structure your team and make these decisions and then go get a coach that fits the style that you're trying to put together. As opposed to the other way around. And I realize that that's different from the way it happens in the rest of the world. But again, this is MLS with a salary cap and some really draconian financial restraints that teams have. I'm not so sure that the coach becomes the first part of that. The coach, I can see them actually bringing the coach in at the end and saying, this is the team we have. This is the style of play these players fit. Can you coach this style of play?
Why do you always make me mad at the end of the shows? So that way, whenever I'm like, oh, we should wrap this up, and then you say something, and I'm like, oh, this is something I can definitely argue with. And this is, you know what? I'll run the show a little longer tonight. This is something I can definitely argue with. Being I'm in charge, I like this. I could have cut it off if you were correct, Kevin. I would just have said, okay, thanks, we're done.
But I am correct.
But no, this time,
giving you more rope to hang yourself.
This time, you once again, you actually, like most time, you're completely wrong, and I will tell you why you're completely wrong. You can't. A coach is going to want to have buy-in on these things, and I'll tell you what your solution is here. Instead of just telling you how wrong you are, I will tell you what the solution here is that you buy good pieces and good players, and then your style of play is reflected in the quality of the players and not necessarily with the coach. But here's the part of that makes sense is your coach has to have buy-in. Your coach has to have input. If your coach likes to see, a midfielder that runs out on the right-hand side with a lot of speed, then, if you're going to put in Sasha Kleshin at right midfield, well, then he's not very fast, and that's not going to work for this coach, and this coach is going to do it. Guillermo got his guys. But you can't tell me that if the Galaxy somehow figure out a way to keep Christian Pavone, that's going to hamper the LA Galaxy if they're going to have a different style. No, it's not, because Christian Pavone is an excellent player. So find good players, and your style of play matters a little bit less, and any coach that you bring in will be happy with those players. But at the same time, the coach is going to want those buy-in. The coach is going to want to have a say in that, and it's a partnership between Dennis and whoever that coach is. And yes, you know what the solution is to not having to worry about changing the roster every time a coach leaves? Find a coach that is good and have them stay. All right. So again, there's solutions to these issues. It just has to do with quality, and it has to do with the LA Galaxy getting it right. And I think it points to more things that you were 100% correct on this, and I will give you points for this. Is that something has to change within the organization, because you're banging your head against the wall doing the same thing over and over again, and you can't understand why your head hurts. Well, it's because you keep banging your head against the wall. So stop banging your head against the wall. Make changes that matter, and put people the same as Dominic Kinnear coming in and being simple, Kevin, and putting people in positions to succeed. The front office needs to have that as well. The front office needs to have people in positions to succeed, and I'm not sure that's the where it's at right now.
Well, and you look, and I'm a believer in Dennis, but I will say that in one thing that I do think he's made a mistake in is, if you are again building for the future and you're putting a project together, look at three of the most dynamic players that he's had in his 2 seasons here. Antuna, Pavone, and Fabio Alvarez, all on loans. 2 of them are already gone. It looks like Pavone could be going, and we don't know about Yanni Gonzalez. If these are pieces that you consider to be very valuable to your team and that are going to build your team going forward, and they're on loan, that's kind of like a lease to buy, and then all of a sudden you don't have enough money to buy, and then you got to start all over again. I mean, they kind of built this team a little bit around Pavone, and he may not be here next year. So does that mean we start all over again?
Counterpoint to that is that the LA Galaxy haven't been stuck with some contracts that maybe they might be stuck with. Look at Yanni Gonzalez. Have you seen enough from Yanni Gonzalez to consider him for next year, Kevin, or is this experiment done and over with?
Well, I haven't seen him in training. I don't know. What I've seen in games, I really can't commit. I can't say that, I want him back. If he came back, if he showed up at the doorstep, I'd let him in. But if I was going to have to invest a lot of money to keep him, I probably wouldn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of those things you sort of look at and you say, okay, that makes some sense. Why perhaps maybe it is. I mean, the loans are good because it gives you a chance to sort of, test out these guys. And listen, you weren't going to be able to buy Christian Pavone outright. So the fact that the LA Galaxy have Christian Pavone is because of the fact that there was a loan out there, right? I think we can agree that the Galaxy weren't going to be able to buy Christian right away. And in fact, whenever they brought him on, remember they didn't have a designated player spot open, so they couldn't even bring him in. They ended up getting the loan for basically for free, which is one of the reasons that it even worked. So I mean, with Pavone, it's a little bit different. With Antuna, I think there are lots of people who think that's a mixed bag. I agree with you that it's better to control, but look what happens whenever you control contracts, which is that you have People Gonzalez for 2 or 3 years, and he has not been great. You may say he turned a corner under Dominic Kinnear, but are you willing to invest the time and money that you have on him, which is a significant amount of money for People Gonzalez? Or if he was on loan, could you have sent him back on loan already? I mean, you can't do it for every player, I realize, but when you do invest, you need to be right. And I think that a lot of times the loans protect you from being wrong, but what happens whenever you're right on players like Christian Pavone is you don't get to control their future. So it's a tough place to be in. But I agree with you, and I can see the flip side of it as well.
Yeah, no, I'm totally in the same boat. You've invested in Jonathan Dos Santos, is a great player, but he's just hurt too much. If he was on a loan situation, might let him go. But then you bring in the player that is making a difference, and he is on a loan. So yeah, you're right. I mean, the financial part of it, dictates everything. And when you're going to commit to players, you really need to make sure that you get everything 100% right.
Hey, loans are cheaper. Loans are cheaper sometimes, which is why you can sometimes bring players in and do that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but it just makes it hard to build that foundation when the foundation is not solid. If the guy's good, he's going to go. If he's there on loan, and then if he's not good, you don't want to keep him anyway. So it's just every year you start over again.
Gone are the years of Bruce Arena bringing in like 3 or 4 Brazilians, trying them out, sending 2 of them back, and keeping Juninho, and Leonardo. Really,
Sarvis.
Yeah, well, Sarvis came from a different place. He was not on loan. He came from Alajuelense. Whenever they got him. But yes, you're correct. I mean, that's what you're looking at for those things. You can get them right. It's just tougher to get them right. So all interesting. All right, what's up from next for the LA Galaxy? No idea. They haven't released any
conference
schedules.
Call.
Yeah, there's a conference call on Wednesday. That's about as far as we go. Thursday night we should have a live show. I imagine eventually there's going to be a small hiatus from the show because, as I mentioned at the top, I'm exhausted, and I know a lot of the guys who have been doing this and the ladies who have been doing this are exhausted as well. So I imagine there'll be a short break, and we may have to do some technical stuff and some other things to sort of keep the COVID not in the studio stuff rocking and rolling. And my wife has requested that I do more shows from home, so I'm actually here and can play with the kids. So we'll keep doing that. But yeah, so that's sort of what's on the horizon for us. I don't know if we're going to have a big show on Thursday. There's a good possibility there could be. We just have to sort of get in gear and try to put that together to sort of wrap up the season. So a lot of stuff still coming from Corner of the Galaxy. We're not going to go anywhere, and certainly we'll be here for breaking news and all that fun stuff. But I expect a hiatus of at least a week or 2 from me here in the coming weeks. So not yet Thursday live show, but maybe after that a couple weeks off. So slacking again, as I like to say. Kevin, anything else you want to talk about, or can we finally end this show? Unless you say something, don't say anything stupid right now, because if you do, I'll have to argue with you, and I will do it. I'm in a mood.
No, there's breaking news. That'll be old by the time this podcast comes out. But an Inter Miami player has tested positive for COVID-19 as they prepare for the playoffs.
It's still out there. I know
it's not going away.
It's not going away. It's going to get worse this winter. So everybody wear a mask and wash your hands and stay safe. That's all we can do. All right. If you're looking for Mr. Kevin Baxter on Twitter, it's at KBaxter11. Head over to the LA Times. Subscribe to his newsletter, which comes out and usually has our podcast located way down there at the bottom. I asked for top billing. I still haven't gotten it, but that's okay. Kevin will have his newsletter out. It's a great way. It's free. Go ahead and subscribe to it, and you can have that. So LATimes.com, all of Kevin's soccer coverage. U.S. men's national team, U.S. women's national team, Southern California teams, all right there, LATimes.com. All right. If you're looking for me on Twitter, at Guesman, at Galaxy Podcasts, and of course, cornerthegalaxy.com for our reviews, our podcasts, our Grading the Galaxy articles. The Hammer has his latest out. And, of course, look for our show live on Thursday. All right, for Mr. Kevin the Panda Baxter, I'm Josh Guesman. You've been listening to Corner of the Galaxy from the box on cornerthegalaxy.com. Have a great one, everybody.
You've been listening to the Corner of the Galaxy podcast on cornerofthegalaxy.com. You can follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at Galaxy Podcast. And be sure to check out and subscribe to iTunes, Stitcher, and Facebook by searching for Corner of the Galaxy. Fans, we thank you for listening, and we ask that you be kind and courteous to your neighbors as you leave the podcast. We thank you for joining us and look forward to seeing you again. Until then, I'm Michael Araujo, and on behalf of the entire Corner of the Galaxy crew, goodbye, everybody.